Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now Z here, and welcome to part 2 of the trans visibility series type thing that we're doing here. As a recap, there's the 31 Days of Trans Visibility prompt list that's going around this month. I don't have time to make a video every day, but I figured that once a week I could take a look at the questions from the previous days that I haven't discussed, and pick and choose a few of the topics to babble on about. And I found it interesting that in the last several days, the questions have centered a lot around community and the people that are around you in your everyday life. You know, there was one day that was about, talk about support that you get from the people in your life, from the medical or mental health areas, from the law. Talk about your interactions with the trans community, if you have them. Talk about your situation with your employment, whether you're out at work, all that stuff. And in a lot of ways, outside of the legal question, which I think is actually a whole nother kettle of fish, I can actually knock all those questions down in kind of one go. Because in terms of support and community and my situation in my job experience, I've sometimes said that I've been very fortunate in that I haven't faced as many obstacles as I know a lot of people have. But to be real, I mean, the truth is much more likely to be a combination of some amount of luck, plus white privilege, plus middle-class privilege, plus just the advantages that come with having landed myself in a city with a very robust trans community. And not only that, but a trans community that is friendly to non-binary identities. And I mean, even my family, like, sure, we had some bumps in the road as I was figuring all this stuff out, but my parents still love me, which is something not everyone can say. I can speak a little bit more about the employment piece. I've now been working at the same company for my survival job for 3 years, I think. And I've managed to be out at the place since day one, since before I started. Before I did start, I called up and spoke to HR, and I spoke to the person who was going to be my manager. And again, this is kind of where the luck combined with privilege thing comes in. I already knew the company was open to discussing those sorts of things, and I was nervous, but I had enough confidence to go through with that conversation. And generally there, people do use he, him, his pronouns for me. I've told them that either he or they is fine. There are some people who do use they, but generally it's he, which is whatever. I know that at least in that space, I'm operating out of a much more masculine expression than I am a feminine expression, so it's understandable. But there's always kind of this awkward adjustment when somebody new enters into the company, because it's sort of on a combination of me plus the sort of environment where people are already using these pronouns for me to clue this new person in about what's going on. I did once have an extremely awkward encounter with one of the newer employees in the men's restroom, where he was just sort of amused at the fact that I was there. And I just straight up said to him, I'm trans, right? Which the outcome of that was about as good as it could have been. He understood, and later on he apologized. And I was pretty proud of myself for being able to find my voice in that moment, because anxiety, and the fact that I have a hard time speaking up when actively inside the men's room, because I think my voice gives me away sometimes. So anyway, the most I have to deal with a lot of the time is awkwardness, which is super fortunate and super privileged, and go look at some other stories about other trans people's lived experiences. I'm sure there are a lot worse stories out there than mine that should be heard and should be paid attention to. The other question from the last week that I wanted to touch on was the one about relationships. In this case, meaning like romantic relationships, and how or whether being trans has affected them. I came into the acknowledgement of my trans identity while my husband and I were still dating. And as I started to explore this and wrestle with it, I talked with him about it and just sort of revealed the anxieties and the pain that I was going through and the questions. And the fact that he made the conscious choice to stick with me, to stay in it, because he was committed, he was emotionally committed. And I mean, there are so many people who would run from a situation like that. And I can't even say that I would blame them. But he stayed, and he wanted to make this journey with me. And he still is. And and the fact that he did, the fact that he was willing to meet with me on this and just be open and honest and communicative and see me for me and stay, was a big part of why I ended up proposing to him. I think in any relationship, when one of the people involved is actively digging out some truth about themselves, that is by necessity going to highlight the need for open and truthful communication, which is when you see people for who they really are, which is what can end up forming really the bedrock of a relationship. And sometimes that communication breaks down, or you find out who the person is and you find out that really you're not all that compatible. But when we are struggling with some aspect of ourselves or excavating some part of ourselves, the other people, the other really important people in our life are going to get involved. And it is going to affect the relationship one way or another. And ultimately, in most cases, I would say, for the best. And that's for the best, even if it goes badly, even if it ends something that had seemed good and fine before. Because if it seemed fine before and the people involved were not being the truest versions of themselves, then it was just an illusion of fine. So there's my tangent on relationships in general. And I think that's where I'm going to wrap this week up. So I'll see you next week for more answers to Trans Month of Visibility questions. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And do check out my Patreon. There is a link in the description below. Have a good week, keep up the good fight, and always be changing.